Hello bookworms! Today I'm going to be doing my January wrap-up video, and I read a total of 15 books in January, so this is going to be a little bit on the lengthy side, but I'm really excited because I think that this is one of the highest amounts of books that I've ever read in a month, and I think that a couple of contributors to that were that my reading bullet journal really helped me because I loved having the daily page count page. Maybe I'll put a little photo of what it looked like at the end of the month here. It really made a huge difference because I was so excited to like fill that in every day that I felt like I had to read a lot. There was only one day during the month that I didn't read at all, and that's because I was playing Dungeons and Dragons for like 14 hours, so there just wasn't any time. Also, I started reading a bit outside of my comfort zone, so I started reading some adult historical fiction novels, and just I feel like I mixed up a lot of the things that I typically read, mixed up my genres, and it really worked for me. It kept me interested and engaged in a lot of the reads that I did end up picking up in January, and I'm just very overall pleased. I'm going to start getting into the wrap-up portion because there's a lot to talk about here. So I started off my year reading the 9th volume of Yona of the Dawn. This is an anime that I really loved, and I really wanted to find out what would happen next because it kind of ended on a cliffhanger, and I was really upset about that, and I really wanted more of the story and more of the characters. From what I looked up online, it said that you should start with volume 9 because it picks up right where the anime left off, but I will say that I felt like while I was reading, I was wondering if I maybe should have started with volume 8 instead because I felt like there was a little bit missing, and I don't know if it's because there was an OVA that had a lot of information about the Yellow Dragon, and I don't know if the 8th volume has that information about the Yellow Dragon. Like, you were just kind of thrown into things in this one, which was good, but I also was like, I feel like slightly disconnected from this. I really loved getting more of these characters. I totally fell in love with all of them when I was watching the anime, but I did miss like the beautiful animation, and I really missed hearing their voices. It was one of my favorite animes of last year. It's an adjustment to start reading it in manga form now. I definitely had a couple of laugh out loud moments because of the Blue Dragon. He was really the focus of this volume of the manga, which made it very enjoyable. But overall, like I said, I definitely liked the anime form better than the manga form. I am planning on continuing reading it because I do need to know like what's gonna happen in the story, but it's definitely gonna take me probably another volume or two at least to adjust, and I ended up giving this one 3 stars. Next, I read 100 Summers by Beatrice Williams. This is an adult historical fiction novel, and this is one that I have wanted to read for so long. Like, it's been on my shelf for years and years and years. And Alexa from Alexa Loves Books and I both decided to buddy read this month because we've been picking up books that have been on our shelves where we're like, this is the one book that we are getting to this month, and this month was 100 Summers. It was honestly just such a pleasure to read. Alexa pointed out that this book is basically Gossip Girl, but it's set in the 1940s, and I could not agree more. It follows a woman who is in high society, and she spends all of her summers in Rhode Island at their beach house, and this story has dual timelines. So part of the story takes place during the current summer in Rhode Island, and part of the story takes place in New York City during the time frame when our main character Lily and her boyfriend of the time Nick had first met and first fallen in love, and everything that was going on with her best friend Budgie during that time. And then flash forward to the future, Budgie and Nick are actually married, so you're kind of trying to figure out the story of like, how could this have possibly happened, because Budgie didn't even really like him very much that first time that Lily met him. The two things that I will say, first of all, because this takes place in the 1940s, there's definitely prejudice against Nick, who is Jewish. That was definitely tough to read at times. I get that it is written that way because of the time period, and obviously that's something that didn't bother Lily because she was in love with him, but it is something, he's not always treated the nicest by everybody because of his religion. Then Budgie is basically the worst friend in the entire world. I thought it was pretty clear from the first chapter that she's one of those awful, awful people that you just want to shake and be like, why are you like this? It was also tough to read about Lily putting up with Budgie because you could just tell that Lily really cared for her as a friend, and Budgie was very out for herself all the time. But I really liked piecing this whole story together, finding out everything that happened. I had a hunch very early on about one of the elements of the book. It changed a little bit of the way through. I really liked the way that they went with it. It was super crazy, and I totally loved it, and now historical fiction is something that I have been picking up left and right because I loved this one so much, which was unexpected, and I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Famous in a Small Town by Emma Mills, and I actually have a finished copy of this that's like up on top of my bookshelf, but I'm kind of trapped in my filming space at the moment. This is actually a kind of tough book for me to review because I really love Emma Mills. She's one of my favorite contemporary YA authors, and I've loved everything that I've read from her so far. I really thought that this one was going to be the same, but it turns out that it is kind of the exception. I really enjoyed the beginning of the novel. I think that Emma writes friends and personalities and teenagers just so well, like they're so true to life, and that's really what kept me going throughout this entire thing. We follow a group of 5 friends, but I personally felt like you really only got to truly know like 2 of them. Our main character Sophie is trying to get this singer Megan Pleasant to come back to her town and perform there, even though Megan has sworn off the town because her high school band got invited to perform at the Rose Bowl, but they are a smaller town with a smaller budget and they are not able to afford to go to California. So she's trying to throw this concert in order to raise money. So for this one, I felt like everything was great. Like all the characters have like sharp wit and great sarcasm, and each one is dealing with their own set of issues. There's a new guy, August, and the 2 of them have a really cute friendship turning relationship type thing. Then about 2/3 of the way through the book, like everything changed. It was just like bombshell after bombshell kept being dropped, and it just didn't feel it was necessary at all for the story. It really took away from the beginning half. It felt like a lot of the like twists and like things that you find out about certain characters toward that time in the book were really afterthoughts, and they didn't really affect the main plot in any way. They were just kind of like, oh, by the way, this, and also this, and you were like, why is this coming out now? It was odd. I still love Emma Mills's writing. I still enjoyed reading this one. I just am sad that I didn't love it as much as her other books, and I ended up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars. Next, I did a reread, and that was for Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. This book is being adapted, and it's going to be coming out on Amazon sometime later in 2019. They haven't actually announced the date yet, but I knew that I wanted to reread it before the show dropped, just so I could have it fresh in my mind, because it has been so many years since my first read. Good Omens follows an angel and a devil who are both living on Earth, and they have been friends for centuries and centuries and centuries. They've seen everything that has been going on, and the whole story takes place over a week leading up to an impending apocalypse. I have to say that I love this book even more the second time around than I did the first time for 2 reasons. One of them being that Crowley is actually going to be played by David Tennant, so every time that I read his parts of the book, I just kept picturing David Tennant and hearing David Tennant's voice in my mind, and that was a pleasure, of course. And then the second reason is that I actually was following along with Tor.com. They did a read-along reread for this book, so every time that I would finish however many pages they specified, I would go and read their recap. And one of the things that was in a recap that I did not notice when I was reading the first time around or this time around was that there was a very subtle Doctor Who reference, so I very much appreciated that, and I'm glad that I read those recaps because I still would have been blind to it if I hadn't. I really love all of the humor and just the abundance of cleverness in this book. I think that Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett are such a great team of writers to have worked on something together. I think that they played really well off of one another. My one main complaint, which I also felt the first time that I read the book, is that Crowley and Aziraphale, I'm probably not saying that correctly, they are the angel and the demon, and I found them to be the most amusing. I thought that they had the best commentary, and I really love their parts, but as you read further, you get perspectives of people who are more directly involved in the apocalypse and also just passing people. And it is nice that they give stories to these other people, but I really enjoyed their parts much more. And I wish that I would have gotten more of Crowley and Aziraphale as opposed to random characters that I wasn't as invested in. So overall, I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kemmerer. This is a new book in what I believe is going to be a duology. It follows our main character named Harper, who lives in Washington, D.C., and she is out on the street one day and she sees this guy kidnapping this unconscious girl. So she goes to save her and she ends up being transported into this fantasy world that is very heavily inspired by Beauty and the Beast. So we're taken to this castle and there is a prince named Ren and he has been cursed and he's just living out his days at the palace with his captain of the guard named Gray, and I really liked Gray a lot. He ended up being my favorite character, and I will say that this book is like quite long, but it was a surprisingly quick read for how long it is. A lot of the chapters are really short, so it was just, I felt like I was just flying through it. I don't want to say it was fantasy light because Emberfall is definitely a fantasy world, but it was, I would say it was very easy to read. It's not like a very overly dense fantasy with a ton of rules. If you're someone that hasn't really read fantasy, I would even recommend reading this one as like a gateway into it. So obviously the premise of the book pretty much is that Harper is in this fantasy world. She kind of wants to go home to be with her family. She is also starting to feel responsible and trying to help Prince Ren break this curse and set the people of his kingdom free. There was a very mean enchantress named Lilith, and I do not like her very much. Harper was a really great character. Harper actually has cerebral palsy, so there were some points in the book where she was struggling with different ailments that she has, and I thought that that was really interesting because I hadn't ever read a book with a character that has cerebral palsy, especially as like the main character. And I also really appreciated that Harper didn't let her disability get in the way of her being a strong character and being able to influence the outcome of things in different ways. That was probably kind of cryptic, but I obviously don't want to give anything away. So I really love this one and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Next, I read The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty, and this is the first book in the Devabad trilogy, and I really enjoyed this first one. I had been wanting to read it for quite a while, but I actually was asked to moderate the panel between S.A. Chakraborty, Roshni Chokshi, and Melissa Albert at Barnes & Noble, so as soon as I was asked, I was like, I gotta read Shannon's book because I haven't ever read that yet. So I picked this one up. It was very cool. It's inspired by Islamic mythology, which is something that I knew nothing about, so it was very different from anything that I've ever read. Actually, it's a dual perspective book, so we have one character named Nari who accidentally summons a djinn after like never having believed in magic, and then she gets taken to like the outskirts of Cairo to this secret community of Devabad, and she finds out so much more about her heritage and this world that she really had no idea of anything that was going on in. And then we also have Ali. He is the second son of the king. He is somebody who, like, so slavery is a thing in this book, and he's somebody who really sympathizes with the other side. He doesn't understand why their race is considered superior to the other people. He sympathizes with the people who are being oppressed, and he is all for them, like, having equal rights, which obviously doesn't really bode very well with his family, who is ruling this court. All of his perspectives had a lot of political intrigue and a lot of court politics, and I really like reading about that. So I really liked Ali's perspective, and I kind of struggled a bit with Nari's perspective. I wasn't really like as interested in her. Then obviously the two perspectives end up converging. From then on, then I felt very invested in Nari too. And it was funny because I buddy read this with Alexa from Alexa Loves Books, and she really liked Nari's perspective and she didn't really like Ali's perspective. But then by the end, I think she ended up liking Ollie's more also. But I think that this is definitely worth reading. It was such a great fantasy. It was such a great first installment. It really like laid a lot of the groundwork for what is going to be coming in the second book, Kingdom of Copper. I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I did another buddy read, and that is The Iron King by Julie Kagawa. And I buddy read this with Alexa from Alexa Loves Books, Rachel from Hello Chelly, and DJ from Life and Fiction. We have started like kind of an unofficial paranormal book club. We're just like picking a book every month that we want to read. So for January, it was The Iron King, and I was really excited about that because I loved Shadow of the Fox so much by Julie Kagawa. And in this one, we're actually following fairies, and you guys know that I love fairies, so I was really excited for this. We're following a girl named Megan Chase, and she gets transported into the fairy realm, and the reason that she ends up going there is because her younger brother gets switched out with a changeling, so she wants to go and bring back her real little brother. I was definitely taken by surprise with this book because the one major thing that would have sold me on it even more is that it is very heavily inspired by A Midsummer Night's Dream, and there are characters from A Midsummer Night's Dream in this book. Once I discovered that, I was like, what? This is so exciting. That was like a major thing that I liked about it, but otherwise, this is an older young adult fantasy, and it definitely read like an older young adult fantasy. I think that it's pretty on par with other books that came out around the same time frame as it. It was definitely different than I was expecting. I thought that we were going to spend a lot more time in the court and like learning more about that, but it really was like a journey to try to get her brother back, and you were taken to all of these different corners of the Fae realm, which I also had not been anticipating. I wasn't really sold on the romance, but I have a feeling that that will be developed further in later books. So I liked it. I thought it was like a fun read, but it was like by no means a new favorite or anything, and it's definitely, as Alexa says, a product of its time. So I ended up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read The Tea Dragon Society by Katie O'Neill. I really loved Katie's artwork, and I really loved Aquacorn Cove, and I've been meaning to read this one like forever, and I just hadn't ever done so. So I picked it up one day, and I'm so glad that I did. I really enjoyed it. Again, I just love Katie's artwork. In it, we're following this young girl who is learning a little bit more about these tea dragons, and it's like this lost art, and it's pretty much like a love story to crafts that take a longer time. Not really been as appreciated in current years where everything is like so quick paced, and I thought that it was really cute. I didn't think that there was like too much of a story, so it was enjoyable to read, and I loved the artwork, but I didn't really feel like, oh my god, this is like the best thing I ever read, you know? I was really just in it because of the cute artwork. See, this one is like really hard to rate, because if I were rating it on like plot and story, I honestly think that I would give it like 2.5, but rating it on the art, I would give it a 5 star. So I don't know what to give this. Next, I read Little Monsters by Kara Thomas. This one was gifted to me by my good friend Jane from It's Jane Lindsay, so thank you again, Jane. I picked up this book one day in the middle of January, and I could not put it down. I was so addicted to it. I read Kara Thomas's Cheerleaders novel a couple months ago, and I liked it, but I definitely liked this one so much better. I'm usually so good at guessing who the culprit is within the first couple of chapters of thrillers, but this one just completely blindsided me. I did not see that ending coming at all. So we follow a girl named Casey, who is the new girl within this town called Broken Falls. Her and her 2 best friends are supposed to go to a party together, and they end up ditching Casey, so she is home. And the next day, one of the girls, Bailey, ends up being missing. Her parents are calling to try to find out what happened to her, where she could have gone, and Casey quickly ends up becoming one of the main suspects within the case because she wasn't with them, and she's new in town. People don't know her as well. She has a past that we learn a little bit more about as the book continues, but I just thought the way that everything unfolded in here was so great, and I'm still just blown away by how messed up some of these characters are. I really couldn't put this one down. I was so heavily invested in it and in finding out the ending, and I will definitely read anything that Kara Thomas puts out. I think that she writes really well, and I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read The Paris Seamstress by Natasha Leister. This was actually my first 5-star read of the year, so spoiler alert for my rating on this one. I really love the story. It was another dual timeline historical novel, and while parts of it do take place in Paris, a vast majority takes place in New York City, which I found to be really interesting. Having gone to college for fashion, I really enjoyed getting a view of the garment district within its heyday on 7th Avenue. That's where like everything was. That's where a lot of fabric stores still are. Since all of the crafting of clothes has kind of been outsourced at this time, it's definitely not what it used to be. But I loved getting to hear all about the different cuts of fabric, the different embellishments, and just everything that went into the design of clothing, and how obsessed Americans were with trying to look like the Parisian women, and also the way that they found out, especially during the war when they weren't getting as much information overseas. It was really interesting. So like I said, this was a dual timeline. We followed Estella in the 1940s. She moves to New York from Paris. She gets a job in the garment district, but she's really has aspirations of having her own line, but people are not really taking her very seriously. And then we're also following her granddaughter, Fabienne, in the current timeline, and she is kind of discovering more about her grandmother's past that she never knew before. There's a lot of things that happen that are tied to World War II, so this novel was pretty heartbreaking at points, but I really loved just, like I said, everything involving the fashion, and I fell so in love with the characters, and everything just wove together so beautifully that I ended up crying like a lot. There were also some people within this novel that were actual real people in history, so I definitely fell into a bit of a Wikipedia rabbit hole as I was reading, and that was really interesting too. I ended up giving this one 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read In an Absent Dream by Shauna Maguire, which is the 4th book in the Wayward Children series. I read this entire thing in one sitting, which is like a big deal for me, even though it is quite short, but I just don't tend to do that with books, so I was like really proud of myself. This one follows Catherine Lundy from the first book. We get to hear her whole backstory and learn about her fantasy world, which is largely inspired by the Goblin Market. It follows her as she travels back and forth between worlds until the day that she turns 18 and she needs to make the decision about which world she is actually going to spend the rest of her life in and call home. While I did really like it and it was a very quick read, it wasn't my favorite in the series. I felt a little bit disconnected from Lundy. I just felt like it was missing some of the specialness that I felt in the first couple of books. I obviously will continue the series. I love it so much, and I'm still amazed at how well Shauna Maguire can tell a story, and like such a fleshed out story in such a short page count. It's so impressive, but this was really fun. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read The Penderwicks on Gardam Street, and this is the 2nd book in the Penderwicks series. There are 5 books in total, and I'm definitely planning on reading all of them this year. I read the first one back in December and fell completely in love with these sisters. This whole family is just the cutest, and every time that I finish one of these books, I just feel so indescribably happy. Like, it just leaves you with such a great feeling. It's just so like pure and innocent, and it really feels like kind of like Anne of Green Gables. And I said this in my review of the first book too, but it really makes you feel like you're reading a classic book. It doesn't feel like something that is contemporary. I continually have to remind myself that the sisters are not wearing like long dresses. In this installment, they're back at their house on Gardam Street, and their aunt ends up springing a major surprise on them. She forces their father to agree to go on a couple of dates because the girl's mother passed away when they were very young, and the mother left him a letter saying that she didn't want him to be lonely, and she asked his sister to give him this letter after a couple of years. The oldest sister, Rosaline, takes it the hardest. She doesn't really want her dad to start dating again. Each of the girls reacts to it in a different way. So they come up with a plan to get their father to date horrible women so that he will not want to date any further. And while that's going on, there's also a whole bunch of other hijinks going on with the other sisters, and I just really love this one. I thought it was just as good as the first one, and I ended up giving this one 5 out of 5 stars. Then I read The Wicker King by Kay Ancrum, and this is the book that was chosen for the Dragons and Tea book club, which is hosted by Amy from A Court of Crowns and Quills, who just posted her first booktube video, so you guys should go and check her out, and Mel from Mel to the Any, who also recently joined booktube, but more toward the beginning of January. Probably something that I wouldn't have picked up on my own, but I did end up enjoying it. I thought it was really interesting, but I have very mixed feelings about this book because the format is really cool. There's some mixed media, and the pages also get darker as the story continues to get darker, which I thought was a really nice touch. But I did struggle a bit because while I did very much enjoy the whole build-up, like in the beginning, once the book got to a certain point, I didn't really enjoy the resolution. I thought that it made sense for the story, but it wasn't as interesting for me to read as the build-up. So basically what happens is we're following these 2 boys who are best friends. They're severely neglected by their parents, and they have formed this like very intense codependent relationship with one another. And one of the boys, Jack, starts having hallucinations, and his best friend August is trying to help him overcome this without getting any adults involved, which obviously is not the best way to go about things. So everything kind of comes to a head, and then things happen. I will say that this was one of like the most heartfelt author notes that I've ever read in a book, and that alone had me feeling super emotional. And the author also answered a whole bunch of questions, which you can read in the Goodreads group for the Dragons and Tea book club. Everything is posted there, so I went and did that once I finished reading this one. I have a complicated relationship with this because I really liked the idea, I really liked the mixed media, but overall it wasn't like a favorite book for me, but I am very glad that I read it, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. Then I read Star Wars Jedi of the Republic, and this is one of the Star Wars comics. As you guys know, I'm trying to read everything in the Star Wars canon universe, except probably not the middle grade books, and I'm still planning on doing a video all about that. I just haven't gotten to it yet because I've had so many other videos to do, so I'm sorry about that, but I swear it's coming. So I read Star Wars Jedi of the Republic Mace Windu by Matt Owens and Jesus Saiz. It was a 5-issue story arc following Mace Windu, and sadly I didn't like it. I thought it was pretty boring. It basically felt like an arc of the Clone Wars, and not in a good way. I really wanted to get more of Mace's character and like some more of his past. And throughout this 5-issue series, we got a very short flashback at one point. And if that had been the focus of the story, I think that I would have liked it a lot more. I just wasn't really invested in this like random planet and what they were trying to do there. I would say that even the artwork in it was not very good, and there was one panel in it like toward the end that I can't tell you what's in it because I don't want to spoil things. I liked that one panel, but even that wasn't drawn very well in my opinion. So sadly I only ended up giving this one 2 out of 5 stars. And then the last book that I read in January was The Art of Losing by Lizzie Mason. This is a new contemporary novel that's coming out on February 19th. It is Lizzie's debut novel, and I was so looking forward to reading it. I really enjoyed it. It's a very heavy-hitting contemporary. It follows a girl named Harley, and she is at a party and she walks upstairs because she wants to leave. She's not someone that's really into parties. She prefers to be home and reading and just isn't really into like drinking and all that kind of stuff. Or she catches her boyfriend cheating on her with her younger sister in her best friend's room. So she's obviously very upset. She leaves the party in a rage, goes home. Then her boyfriend, who had been drinking, tries to drive her younger sister home, gets into a car accident, and her younger sister goes into a coma, but her ex-boyfriend, who was drunk driving, is totally unscathed and fine. Obviously that makes Harley even madder, but it's really sad because you're reading all about her like hoping that her sister is going to live, but also trying to deal with being upset with her because of the events that led up to this point. And I really liked her best friend Cassidy. I think the two of them had a really good relationship, and she also starts becoming closer with her next door neighbor Raph, who himself had just spent some time in rehab. It was interesting because you get like 2 very different kinds of addicts. Her ex-boyfriend now doesn't think that he had a problem at all, and Raph is somebody who is really trying to actively work to fix things and to make sure that he doesn't ever get to like a really bad place in his life. So I really liked their relationship. It's very heavy. It's not like a light, fluffy, fun contemporary. It's really like focused on alcoholism and the way that drugs and drinking can ruin people's lives. So I thought it was a really important read, and I think that it's good, especially for people who can relate to that or know certain people who struggle with addiction, but it's not necessarily something that I would reread because it was such a tough read, like, to begin with. So I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. So there you have it. Those are the 15 books that I read in January. I had such a great reading month. I'm still just so pleased that I was able to read all of these, and I enjoyed so many of them. Let me know if you read anything that I mentioned. I have a very big February TBR, which I already put up, and a Contemporary-thon TBR, which should be up next week, I think. And yeah, I'm like really hoping that I can read 15 books again. I will be so pleased with myself if I'm able to do that. This was like just the best reading month ever. That's all that I have for this video, and I will see you guys soon in a new one. Bye!